So if you, hopefully by now you've heard that the temple ceremonies, the endowment ceremony had some modifications. So I wanted to do a video about this, just as so this is kind of a follow-up to our what I wish I had learned in my temple prep class series. So if you follow that, great, you'll probably enjoy this video here. So I want to talk about some of these changes and updates that they've made in the endowment ceremony. If you remember from our discussion around the temple ceremonies and the endowment ceremony specifically, there have been changes made to it off and on ever since Joseph Smith's day. So sometimes it doesn't change for a long period of time. Sometimes there's lots of little changes that happen. We've seen several since 2018 where little changes in wording and other things have been happening. Most of the major changes to the endowment historically came in changing some of the language that has been around for over 100 years in the endowment, where they updated it. So this one had a few of those. There's a few things you can kind of almost classify the changes in the endowment into some classifications. If you haven't been, go. The biggest thing that you'll notice when you go is you are in and out quickly. So the time you go to sit down and they take you from the chapel into the endowment room to start it to the time you're back down in the dressing room ready to go, it can be about an hour and 20 minutes. Which if you've historically been going to the temple, you know that's quick. I mean, the whole ceremony from start to finish is around an hour-ish time frame, basically, by itself, not including sitting in the chapel or dressing room time or things like that. So it's faster. The largest change you'll notice when you go through the temple is there used to be things that were repeated often. Now, if you've never been to the temple before, so this new update is like the new thing. You've never experienced the previous versions. There used to be a lot of repetition built into the temple ceremony, which is there to help you learn. And from what I understand, that there used to be even more repetition before. Back in Brigham Young's time frame and things, they had a lot more repetition built into it. So they've slowly been getting rid of that repetition. So this update, that's where the time savings really comes in, is they've cut out almost everything that's repetitive. So a lot of times you'll hear in the idea of, this is an example of the return and report concept, when you learn about the creation and God says, hey, Jehovah, go down and make this, and he says, we'll go do that, and then Jehovah comes back, we made it, and goes through the exact same list of stuff that God just told him to do in the report. They don't do that anymore. They just go, Jehovah comes back and just says, hey, God, we did what you asked. Okay, great. Here's the next thing. So that is condensed a lot down. So things aren't repeated in the conversations between people in the church educational video for the endowment, which is amazing. It was interesting because they took the duplication in the prayer circle when you go through and do all the different parts of it. That where they explain things has been taken out, so they just assume you know it and you know what to do when they tell you to do it. That confused some people. The people that were older, that were used to that being at a slower pace. The prayer circle moves much faster now. So if you are a part of a prayer circle, just be ready to move quick through going through things, because they shortened that part down. It was fun. It was nice to see it. Like doctrinally, hardly anything changed. In fact, they added a concept to the temple ceremony that was not there before, to continue to add more about Christ and the atonement and those things. But overall, like I says, it was cutting out the duplication stuff, the repeated lines. That got cut out. It felt like to me, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, if you've been to the temple and know the past ones as well, it felt like Eve had a little bit more speaking in the after they got kicked out of the Garden of Eden. I could be wrong on that. Maybe I just hadn't paid as much attention to that in the past, but it felt like she had a little bit longer lines, like one extra sentence or something from before. Like again, for the most part, it's the exact same thing. They just cut out the duplication areas. So there were a few wording clarifications or changes. They updated some words in talking about things. So they took out some of the words that had been historically used or traditionally used in the endowment that maybe we define differently today. A lot of this came around the dialogue of Lucifer in the discussion with like creation stuff. They seem to explain Lucifer's background a little better at the beginning, which was kind of nice. I've heard from people that's kind of refreshing to have that added in, not just start with here's the earth, Adam and Eve, go. It kind of goes a little bit earlier than that now. Um, they just took out some of the words that are traditionally the Satan traditionally uses. Like I says, they updated it so it's more. It, I think those words that he used traditionally are now somewhat understood in a different way, and so they've changed it to make it sound more easier to go. Oh, that's what that means in today's world. Okay, great. So they updated that part. They updated another part where they Satan owns what he's doing rather than passes it off to the tyrants and people. That was an interesting change, not quite a doctrinal change, but almost. Um, I just a clarification of it, basically. The part that they did add, and I was surprised to hear this. It stood out to me. Is they added a part talking again? They're emphasizing more about how the temple is about a metaphor for our relationship and connection with Jesus Christ. And they added another part where they brought this up. And in that, they talk about they quote the phrase from 2 Nephi 25:23, where he says, "We are saved by grace after all we can do." And they used the Book of Mormon phrasing for that. Now, that phrase has some debates and some challenges for people. Um, because it makes it sound like we are only saved by grace after we do. So we have to work, and then after we've done our work, then Christ's grace kicks in after that. This is a concept that is probably one of the most often used tools by evangelicals and people who are not LDS to beat up on LDS because evangelicals and Protestantism more believes in saved exclusively by grace. There's nothing you can do to affect it. It's all grace. So this is kind of that debate of works versus grace type idea. It was interesting that they put that in there. There's been a lot of research done on this. BYU at their BYU Resource Center on their website, if you type in BYU Resource Center, you can find it. There's great scholarly articles about this. Stephen E. Robinson's book, Believing Christ, he did in 1992, talks about this as well. If you go to the church's website, if you just do a Google search for After All We Can Do LDS or something, you'll find an October 2007 conference talk by Elder Claudio Zivik of the 70. He gave a talk kind of using that same phrase, after all we can do. So the thing is a lot of the scholarship around this has been that it's not that it's our the knee-jerk reaction to that phrase that we have to work and then Christ's grace kicks in after that is incorrect. That is not the appropriate way to think about that phrase. Most scholars will point to the idea that we believe that the grace of Christ covers all. We can't save ourselves. Works don't save us. Works help. In there's a play on works versus grace, and that's an important play and distinction to look at. So from an LDS standpoint, if you read section 76 of the Doctrine and Covenants, this is kind of the phrase, the concept idea that revelation is giving, is that you realize the grace of Christ makes all 3 degrees of glory possible. We think of the plan of salvation. Those are only possible through the grace of Christ. Okay, we can't do anything of ourselves to qualify for those, short of never committing sin. Once you've committed sin, you can't do that at all. You have no guarantee to go to those places. In fact, you're guaranteed not to go to those places, except for the atonement of Christ gives us a free gift of not banishing us. Okay, without the atonement, you have to realize when you think of the plan of salvation, without the atonement, there's nothing after we die. Our spirits go to spirit prison, and that's it. We're done. There's nothing else because we've all fallen short of we have not lived the perfect life like Christ did, and so we all go to spirit prison, and that's it. That's the end of it. There's nothing more. But through the grace of Christ, his atonement, he has opened up the possibility for us to go to one of the 3 degrees of glory if we choose to. We can choose to not follow any of that. That's the outer darkness part. But the grace of Christ opens up the possibility of all 3 degrees of glory. Our works only kick in to determine which one of those 3 we go to. Basically, that's it. So, and it's only through that grace of Christ that we have that opportunity. Now, Dan McClellan, who is a pretty controversial LDS scholar, he's a scholar of the Bible. Some people like him, some people hate him. He's got some good scholarship, I have to admit. If you look at him from an objective standpoint, he's got some good stuff. So I've enjoyed his works. He wrote a paper that he released in quite a few years ago on this very phrase. He went through and looked at during the 1800s, how was this phrase used to understand it in the context of the time that Joseph Smith was translating the Book of Mormon. So how would Joseph Smith and the early saints maybe have thought about this phrase back then? What he discovered, and this is I think he has better proof about this, but he comes to a very similar conclusion to a lot of Bible scholars, or LDS scholars, I should say, that we should think of that phrase not as after all we can do, Christ's grace kicks in, but despite. So if you change the wording and say, despite all we can do, Christ's grace saves us. That's probably a more accurate way to look at that verse. So when that comes up in the temple, just realize it does not mean that we are saved after we've done our works and then Christ kicks in. What it means is Christ's grace will do everything for us, basically, except for our part, which is when we follow Christ, we're not guaranteed, just because the atonement's there doesn't guarantee us celestial kingdom. To get the celestial kingdom, we have to keep Christ's commandments. We have to follow him, do what he has asked of us. That is our part, and he will help us on that journey, and he'll make up any difference above and beyond our part to compensate, to help us, basically. So that's the important idea to think about. So a little more nuanced than what we get in the Book of Mormon. Now it's in the endowment ceremony. So think more about the word, instead of after all we can do, despite all we can do, might be a better way to think about that. But the church itself hasn't officially said that's the new phrasing, because now that phrasing is in the endowment ceremony, and so you'll cover that from 2 Nephi 25:23. I had to look at my notes for a second there. It's still phrased the same as in 2 Nephi 25:23, even though it probably meant more about despite what we do, Christ's grace is there to help us, basically. So just a little bit better way to think about that, to help to clarify that teaching, since it's now going to be a little bit more prominent in the minds of members as you go to the temple. So if you have any other questions, please feel free to comment on the video, and I'll do my best to answer those, and look forward to seeing you in our next videos.